The small-town high school auditorium smelled faintly of old wood and chalk dust. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, casting soft patterns on the worn-out stage where students waited nervously with their sheet music. Their teacher, Mr. Peterson, stood at the piano, adjusting his glasses as he prepared to assign solo parts for the spring concert. In the very back of the room sat a quiet woman. Her name was Elena Carter. Nothing about her drew attention: her plain cotton dress, her faded shoes, the way her hair was tied in a simple bun. She wasn't a student nor a staff member. She was there only to watch her niece, Lily, rehearse. Lily had begged her to come since her parents couldn't make it. Elena had agreed, content to stay unnoticed in the shadows. But fate had something else planned that day. Mr. Peterson addressed the choir. He explained that the highlight of the concert would be one of the most difficult opera solos ever written, Puccini's Nessun Dorma. His voice echoed as he asked who among them was brave enough to attempt it. The students shifted nervously in their seats, whispering to one another. No one raised their hand. With a sigh, his eyes swept the room and, for reasons no one could explain, landed on Elena at the back. He pointed at her. "You? Why don't you give it a try?" Elena blinked in surprise. "Me? I think you're mistaken. I'm not a student." "It doesn't matter," he insisted. "We just need a voice to test the solo. Come forward." The students snickered. Some rolled their eyes. To them, she looked like an ordinary woman who had no business singing one of the greatest arias ever composed. Lily's cheeks flushed red as she tried to intervene. "Mr. Peterson, that's my aunt, she's only here to watch." But he cut her off with a raised hand. "Music doesn't care who you are. Please, just one line." Elena hesitated, then slowly stood. As she made her way to the stage, the whispers grew louder. "This is going to be embarrassing," someone whispered. "She probably doesn't even know the song." She stepped onto the stage, took the sheet music from the teacher's hand, and glanced at it briefly. She didn't need to read it. Every line was already etched into her heart. She closed her eyes and took a breath. When she sang the first note, the air itself seemed to stop. The voice that came from her was not timid, not uncertain, but strong, pure, and resonant. It rose and fell with effortless control, each note dripping with emotion, each phrase carrying the weight of someone who had lived every word. The auditorium walls seemed to tremble. The laughter stopped instantly. Students sat frozen in their chairs, their mouths open in shock. Even Mr. Peterson lowered his baton slowly, unable to believe what he was hearing. Elena's voice climbed higher, shimmering with passion, and when she held the final note, it rang with such power that the silence that followed felt almost holy. No one moved. No one spoke. Mr. Peterson finally managed a whisper. "That was extraordinary. Who are you?" Elena handed the sheet music back gently, lowering her eyes. "Just someone who used to sing a long time ago." But the students couldn't contain themselves. They whispered in amazement, unable to reconcile the plain woman before them with the divine sound they had just heard. Lily stared at her aunt in disbelief. "You never told me you could sing like that." Before Elena could respond, another voice rose from the back of the room. It belonged to a man in a gray suit who had been sitting quietly, watching everything. His eyes shone with recognition, his words slicing through the stunned silence. "It really is you, isn't it? Elena Carter, or should I say La Stella, the lost star of the Vienna Opera House." Gasps spread through the room. Students looked at each other, shocked. Mr. Peterson nearly dropped his baton. Vienna, the greatest stage in the world. Elena froze. Her shoulders stiffened. She had spent years hiding from that name, from that life. And now, in a small-town school rehearsal, her secret had been spoken aloud. The woman they thought was ordinary was, in truth, a vanished legend. The room was frozen in disbelief after the man's words echoed through the air. Elena stood still, her face calm but her hands trembling at her sides. She had avoided that name for years. La Stella. The star. Once celebrated as one of the greatest voices in opera, now nothing more than a ghost in the memories of those who had seen her perform. Mr. Peterson's voice cracked as he spoke. Is this true? You were an opera star? At Vienna? The students erupted in whispers, their awe filling the room. She's famous. I can't believe it. We just heard a legend sing. Elena shook her head slowly. That was another life. That person no longer exists. But the man in the gray suit took a step forward, his eyes never leaving hers. I know why you left. I remember that night. The night the world lost its brightest star. But hearing you just now, I realized something: you never truly left. The music still lives inside you. The students were spellbound. For them, this was no longer a simple rehearsal. It was as if the walls of their school had melted away and they were standing inside a great concert hall, witnessing a miracle. Lily gripped her aunt's hand tightly. Why didn't you ever tell me? You could have been on the biggest stages. You could have been remembered forever. Elena's eyes softened as she looked at her niece. Because, sweetheart, sometimes the world takes more than it gives. And when it hurts too much, the only way to survive is to walk away. Mr. Peterson stepped closer, his usually stern face softened with something like pleading. But your gift, you can't bury it forever. Don't you see what you just did? You made them feel something they've never felt before. You gave them more than music, you gave them passion. The students nodded eagerly, their eyes wide. One of them spoke up nervously. Please, could you teach us? We're not good enough, we know that. But if you showed us even a little, maybe we could be better. Another chimed in more boldly. Yeah. We want to learn. We want to know how to sing like you, how to make people actually feel the music. Elena looked at their hopeful faces and felt her resolve begin to waver. For so many years, she had believed her silence was the only way to protect herself from the pain of her past. But here in this small auditorium, she saw something different. Young hearts desperate to believe they could matter, desperate to find their own voices. She turned toward Mr. Peterson, who was still watching her with quiet intensity. I cannot be La Stella again, she said softly. That chapter is closed. But her gaze returned to the students and finally to Lily's hopeful eyes. Perhaps I can help. A little. The room erupted in cheers. Lily threw her arms around her aunt in gratitude, whispering through happy tears, thank you so much. Mr. Peterson exhaled a deep breath as though a heavy weight had lifted from the room. For the first time in years, he smiled warmly. Then it's decided. This won't just be a concert. It will be a rebirth for them and maybe even for you. But not everyone in that room celebrated. As Elena spoke, she didn't notice the figure standing quietly at the back of the hall near the door. A tall woman, cloaked in shadows, her expression sharp and calculating. Her eyes locked onto Elena with something more than recognition. They carried a mixture of bitterness and triumph, as though she had found something she had been hunting for years. She slipped away unnoticed, her heels clicking softly on the hallway floor. Elena had no idea that her decision to sing again, even just a little, had already awakened the ghost she thought she had buried forever. The next morning, the school auditorium felt different. The same worn chairs, the same dusty piano, the same sunlight streaming through the tall windows, but now there was an energy in the air, a sense of anticipation none of the students had ever felt before. Elena stood at the front, her hands clasped calmly, her expression both gentle and firm. She had agreed to guide them, but only as Elena, never again as La Stella. Still, even in her simplicity, she carried a quiet authority that commanded respect. The students gathered around nervously, clutching their sheet music. For the first time, they were eager not because of the concert but because of her. She began softly, her voice steady but warm. Music is not about perfection. It is not about hitting the highest note or holding the longest breath. Music is about truth. When you sing, you are telling a story, and if you don't feel it here, she pressed her hand to her chest, then no one else will feel it either. The students nodded, captivated. She asked one of them to step forward, a shy boy with trembling hands. His voice cracked on the first note and his classmates giggled. But Elena raised her hand, silencing them immediately. "Do not laugh," she said firmly. "Courage deserves respect." He sang with fear, yes, but also with honesty. "That is the beginning." She guided him gently, showing him how to breathe, how to stand, how to let the music flow instead of forcing it. When he tried again, the difference was astonishing. His voice was still fragile, but it carried something new, hot. The other students leaned forward, their disbelief turning into admiration. If she could transform him in minutes, what could she do for all of them? Lily stepped up next, her eyes sparkling with determination. She had always loved to sing but lacked confidence. Under her aunt's guidance, her voice blossomed, clear and strong, filled with emotion she never knew she could release. Tears glistened in Elena's eyes as she listened. For the first time in years, she wasn't just hearing music, she was feeling life breathe through it again. Day after day, rehearsals transformed. The laughter of mockery was replaced by the joy of discovery. Voices that once cracked and faltered grew rich and confident. Mr. Peterson watched in amazement as his students achieved what he had never thought possible. It wasn't technique alone, it was the soul Elena breathed into them. But with every note sung, Elena felt the past tugging at her more strongly. Old memories crept back, the glow of stage lights, the roar of applause, and the pain that had driven her away. At night, when she returned home, she sat by her window staring into the darkness, her heart torn between the peace of her quiet life and the fire that music had rekindled inside her. And while the students grew stronger, unseen eyes continued to follow her. The woman who had slipped out of the auditorium that first day had not disappeared. She watched from the shadows, attending rehearsals unnoticed, gathering information. Her name was Marissa Hale, once Elena's closest rival on the opera stage. Years ago, when Elena had walked away, Marissa had taken her place under the spotlight. But even in glory, she had lived in the shadow of La Stella's absence. And now, seeing her again, seeing her voice still alive, it awakened both fear and jealousy. One evening after rehearsal, as Elena walked alone through the quiet school corridor, she heard the faint echo of footsteps behind her. She paused, her instincts sharp, but when she turned, the hallway was empty. Only a faint scent of perfume lingered in the air, one she recognized instantly from years past. Her chest tightened. The ghosts of her old life were closer than she had imagined. Still, she said nothing. She returned home to Lily, hiding her unease. But deep inside, she knew the past was no longer something she could escape. It was coming for her, step by step, note by note. And the concert was only weeks away. The weeks passed, and the air inside the school grew thick with both excitement and tension. The annual concert, once dismissed as a small-town event no one truly cared about, had suddenly become the heartbeat of every student. Their voices no longer stumbled with fear, they rose with strength, carrying stories of their own. But with every rehearsal, Elena felt the weight pressing down on her. She had promised herself this would only be a quiet guidance, nothing more. Yet the music was pulling her in deeper, reawakening emotions she had locked away years ago. Each time Lily sang, Elena saw a reflection of herself as a young girl, innocent, brave, and unaware of the storms that awaited in the world of fame. One evening, as the rehearsal came to an end, Mr. Peterson approached Elena. His face was pale, but his eyes were burning with determination. "Elena," he whispered, glancing around to make sure no one was listening, "I received a call today. From the city. They heard rumors that you were here teaching." Elena froze. "And they want to come. Talent scouts. Agents. Even reporters. If this is true, then," he paused, his voice trembling, "your anonymity is gone." Her heart pounded. She had hidden for so long, disappearing from the glittering world that had once celebrated her. She never wanted that life again. But could she stop it now? Meanwhile, in the dim glow of a nearby cafe, Marissa Hale sat at a corner table, her red lips curved in a cold smile. In her hand was a newspaper clipping, old and yellowed, with Elena's face on the front page under the headline, "La Stella Retires, a Mystery That Shook the Opera World." Marissa whispered to herself, so the star was only sleeping. But not for long. She had already sent letters, made calls, and stirred whispers in the right circles. If Elena returned, even in the smallest way, Marissa would make sure the world saw her fall. For Marissa, this wasn't about music anymore. It was about vengeance and about erasing the shadow that had haunted her career for years. Back in the small town, the students remained unaware of the storm building outside their little world. For them, every rehearsal was magic. The old piano, though missing keys, suddenly sounded alive under Elena's touch. She guided them through harmonies, shaping their voices into something far greater than any of them imagined possible. One night, as the stars shimmered outside, Lily found Elena sitting by the window, lost in thought. "Aunt Elena," Lily said softly, "why do you look so sad when you sing?" Elena turned slowly, startled by the question. She tried to smile, but her eyes betrayed her. "Because, my dear, music carries both joy and pain. And sometimes the pain is stronger." Lily walked over and hugged her. "Then let's sing until the joy wins." Those simple words pierced through Elena's heart. For the first time in years, she felt a fragile hope stirring inside her, a hope she wasn't ready to admit aloud. The night of the dress rehearsal arrived. The auditorium was filled with parents, teachers, and curious townsfolk who had heard the whispers of a miracle voice guiding the children. The air buzzed with anticipation. As the students took their places, Elena stood in the shadows, her heart racing. She had no intention of performing, only to watch. But as the first notes rang out, she felt a familiar sensation, the stage calling her back like an old friend she had abandoned. And then it happened. The power went out. Gasps filled the room as the auditorium was plunged into darkness. The piano fell silent and the children froze in fear. For a long, tense moment, no one moved. Then, from somewhere in the shadows, a voice rose. Soft at first, trembling with restraint, but growing stronger with every note. It was Elena. She hadn't meant to sing, not here, not now. But the silence demanded it, and the children needed her. Her voice, untouched by time, soared through the darkness like a beacon of light. Each note wrapped around the audience, calming their fears, commanding their awe. By the time the lights flickered back on, people were on their feet, staring at her with wide, disbelieving eyes. The truth was out. The woman they had known as the quiet aunt was no longer just Elena. She was La Stella. And as the applause erupted, Marissa Hale, watching from the very back, clenched her fists so tightly her nails dug into her palms. Her eyes burned with rage, but also with a dangerous resolve. The auditorium buzzed with energy. Word had spread like wildfire after the dress rehearsal. La Stella had returned. The small-town concert, once dismissed as a trivial school event, was now swarming with reporters, talent scouts, and curious onlookers. Cameras flashed at every corner, hungry for the face of the mysterious opera star who had vanished years ago. Elena sat quietly backstage, her hands folded in her lap, her heart heavy. She hadn't wanted this. She only wanted to help the children, to guide Lily to live in peace. Yet here she was, thrust back into the spotlight she had escaped, her anonymity shattered. Lily noticed her unease and placed a small hand over hers. "You don't have to sing tonight if you don't want to," she whispered. Elena looked at her niece and smiled faintly. "But what if I do?" Lily's eyes widened. "Really?" Elena nodded. For the first time in years, she wasn't afraid. Perhaps this was not the end of her quiet life, but a new beginning. The curtain lifted. The children walked onto the stage, their nervous faces glowing under the lights. They sang beautifully, every note carrying the lessons Elena had instilled in them: honesty, courage, and heart. The audience listened in rapt silence, their admiration growing with each song. But midway through the program, a sudden interruption broke the flow. From the front row, a tall, elegant woman rose to her feet. Her voice sliced through the air like a blade. Beautiful but incomplete. Gasps rippled through the crowd as Marissa Hale stepped forward, her presence commanding attention. "What this performance needs," she declared, "is a true soprano. Someone who understands the grandeur of opera. Someone like me." She turned toward Elena, her eyes gleaming with challenge. "Or her." The audience stirred, whispers growing louder. The children froze on stage, looking toward Elena with wide eyes. For a moment, Elena considered walking away. She had nothing to prove, no desire to compete. But then she looked at her students, their hope, their faith, their dreams shining in their faces. This wasn't about rivalry. It wasn't about Marissa. It was about them. Slowly, Elena rose from her seat and stepped onto the stage. The audience erupted, cameras flashing, voices shouting. She raised her hand and silence fell. She turned to Marissa, her voice calm but firm. Opera is not a battle. It is a gift. And tonight it belongs to them. She gestured to the children. But Marissa's smile didn't falter. Then prove it. Sing. Let them hear who you really are. Elena closed her eyes. For a heartbeat, the weight of years pressed down on her. The failures, the heartbreak, the fear that had driven her into hiding. And then she let it go. When she opened her eyes, there was no hesitation left. The music began, simple at first, just the soft chords of the piano. And then Elena's voice rose. It wasn't just powerful. It wasn't just flawless. It was alive. Each note carried the depth of her pain, the warmth of her love, and the courage of her rebirth. The auditorium shook with emotion. People wept openly, clutching their hearts, unable to look away. Marissa stood frozen, her confidence crumbling. She had expected a shadow of the woman she once knew. Instead, she faced a star brighter than ever, not because of fame, but because of truth. The children joined in, their young voices blending with Elena's, filling the room with harmony so pure it seemed to lift the very air. It wasn't just a song. It was a testament, a promise that music, when born from the soul, could never truly die. As the final note lingered in the air, silence followed. A silence so deep it was almost sacred. And then, thunderous applause. The crowd rose to their feet, shouting, clapping, cheering until the walls trembled. Tears streamed down Elena's face, but this time they were tears of freedom. She wasn't hiding anymore. She wasn't running. She was home, in music, in truth, in herself. Marissa lowered her gaze, defeated not by rivalry but by realization. She turned and walked away quietly, swallowed by the shadows she herself had created. Elena looked at Lily, who was beaming with pride, her eyes shimmering with joy. She pulled her niece close, whispering, "This is your stage now. Promise me you'll sing with your heart." "I promise," Lily whispered back. That night, the world rediscovered La Stella. But for Elena, it wasn't about reclaiming fame or glory. It was about reclaiming herself. And as the curtain fell, she knew this was not an ending. It was a beginning. The simple woman was no longer in disguise. She was an opera star reborn. The war for the stage had just begun.